Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast with Blaha. And pretty common meal for me here: Greek yogurt, almond butter, frozen blueberries. All right, let's talk about the importance of changing your grip widths and stance widths. And this is something that we see with a lot of lifters who are not thinking in context of maximizing and broadening their strength base as much as possible, which usually includes getting as much hypertrophy as possible. In other words, using different angles and things to maximize the muscle size of every muscle involved in the lift, not just where they fail at in that lift. In other words, if you do a normal bench press or a normal back squat and you take a set pretty much to where it grinds, you get to either like 1 rep in reserve, you get a really grindy rep, or you actually fail. Not every single muscle in there is given the same amount of fatigue. And that's something that people don't always think through. And you'll see coaches like Ripto and say, well, that doesn't matter because if our weakest links are the ones that are giving it, we're building it in the ratios we need for the lift to go up. And this is why people get overuse injuries. This is why people have a lot of problems. Again, I think that's one of the biggest causes of injury because you are doing it that way all the time and you're not balancing things out and balancing out the movement patterns. So certain tendons and things always handle the same load. Now, we could talk about overuse in terms of these things also, and that's its own topic. But right now, I want to talk about just the muscle development side. And here's the thing. If you are changing grip widths, and we'll use different exercises. We'll discuss squatting, we'll discuss deadlifting, rowing, benching, because that's most people's foundational stuff, right? Those 4 areas are what most people are going to use to base build. And it's where most of your muscle is coming from, or from exercises like that, at least when you're building a good base. And I'm not saying novices need to do this, by the way, because novices can grow off of 5 or 6 lifts. Novices can pretty much maximize their muscle size off 5 or 6 lifts, pushing them really hard for 6 months, and then going into a little more advanced training. But when we start getting up towards intermediate, and absolutely for advanced lifters, this is where this stuff matters. And what I mean is that we get better overall muscular development. And if we get better muscular development, we get better strength. And when you look at something like a bench press, what is it I tell people with exercises? The best hypertrophy exercise for any muscle is to do 2 different exercises. To do 2 good exercises would be the best exercise for a given muscle. So when you look at a bench, what happens is we change the grip. Something very similar that happens when we go up and down in the angles, right? Look at the data that we have, both biomechanics, EMG, stuff like that. When you bring your grip in on a bench, the emphasis goes further up the chest slightly. In other words, a closed grip bench works more upper chest. It de-emphasizes the lower chest a little bit. And again, when I say this, I don't want people to think, oh, you can't build a lower chest at all with this. That's not what we mean by de-emphasize. On a bench press, and we need to be clear here, the entire chest gets worked. It's not just the lower chest. It's not the middle chest. It's all of it, top to bottom, left to right. It's not in the exact same ratios to the muscle. And again, this is one reason that it's good to do 2 different exercises, because any exercise variation will put a little more emphasis in different parts of the muscle, and it'll give us the potential for a more synergistic response in causing it to grow. So you take a bench press, what happens? We change the grip. So we come in, the focus goes further up the chest. Also incorporates more delt, incorporates more tricep. What happens when we start going further out? It goes the other way. It goes the other way. The triceps get de-emphasized. And again, they still get worked. Your triceps can still hypertrophy from benching. We have plenty of hypertrophy studies showing it happens. And whether it's a maximum one or not really depends. Not a lot of novice lifters actually can get pretty good tricep growth off the bench. Some studies even show that extensions don't even cause their triceps to go faster if they are benching, but other studies have shown that they do, but those aren't usually completely rank novices. Rank novices, the bench actually causes as much tricep growth as they can get, at least in the studies that have looked at it. Triceps get de-emphasized. So in other words, it works more at the lower chest. So this is one reason it's good for you to train multiple grips. And you can rotate through them, and you can use one as a primary, and you can use your normal grip, might be pinkies on the rings usually, or baseline standard grip, and you might add in some close grip bench. In fact, a lot of the close gripping bench can replace a lot of inclining. It just depends on what you're trying to do with it. And as you go wider, you can do all the way out to an illegal wide bench. Which again, very hard on the shoulders. You need to be very careful if you do this. It's its own movement with its own set of rules. We really build that lower and middle chest up, and it teaches us to get tight and hold tighter. We also lose the ability to use our lats to pop out of the bottom. Which is one of the reasons we're forced to sometimes not only use less weight, forces us to use more chest. So just by changing grips, we have new exercises. Just like an incline, a decline, a flat, they're all different movements. Changing grips is a different movement. And especially if we go from a close grip all the way out to a normal grip and then an illegal wide, that's a lot of variation. All right, how about rowing? Rowing's a great one. I usually have the baseline grip as shoulder width, same as basically a close grip. Like when we're doing our pen leg rows. Well, what does that do for us? Works pretty balanced back development. It gives us a lot of lat, hits a lot of upper back also. What do we mean by upper back? I mean the trapezius, the traps, rhomboids, posterior deltoids, right? It's very balanced. Happens if we go wider. Just like when we go closer on the bench press, it works higher up. The ratio shifts. The wider we go on a row, the more it shifts up. Does it still work the lats? Of course it does. A snatch grip row still works your lats. It won't hit them as hard, particularly the lower lats, as the shoulder width, but it still hits them. It works more trap. Works more rhomboid, more posterior deltoid, and that's a big one. The delt activation gets quite a bit higher. So if we use a couple different grips of rows, we can affect all of that. Of course, and then chin-ups and pull-ups have their own sets of rules as far as how the grip affects it, underhand, overhand, how wide you go. All right, what about squats? The wider we go, the more adductor we use. This is why Louis Simmons says what? He means for the squat. Because wide will carry over to close, but close doesn't carry over to wide. Why? Because a very close tends to have a very balanced emphasis on quads, adductors, glutes. The hypertrophy on all three is very even, actually, when it's been studied on an Olympic squat. Usually with quads getting slightly less growth than adductors and glutes. As we go wider, we get more adductor. We also get more abductor, which is the hip muscle. Adductor being the groin, adductor being the hip. I tend to promote most of my lifters train wide most of the time on a squat, but there's a place for some narrower squatting. Again, we might do a phase of speed work with a narrower squat. How about deadlifts? This is a big one. Sumo and conventional. The wider we go, the less back we use, the more lower body we use. Again, particularly adductor. Obviously, adductor gets hit a lot harder as we go wider. But we use more quad. Okay, on a sumo, as we go wider on the deadlift, we use more quad, we use more adductor. Starts to make the deadlift into actually a legitimate quad exercise. And deadlifts cause some quad growth anyways. But it takes focus off the back. The back gets used less. And by back, what do we mean? The lower back, the erectors. They don't work as hard. As we go in narrow or go back to conventional, we still use leg drive and everything. We still use hip and hamstring and glute. The quads get de-emphasized. The adductors get a little de-emphasized. The back gets a lot more. Conventional deadlift is a very back-dominant exercise that still uses glutes and hamstrings as primary movers. But the amount of back activation we get goes up quite a bit, and you can tell the difference as you're doing them. So when we start looking at these movements, just these 4 basic movements, changing our stance and our grip turns them into completely new exercises that changes where the emphasis is, changes the hypertrophy, and actually allows us to get more overall development if we actually train the different positions. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.